Hello, and welcome to the McGovern Institute's first ever Story Slam. I'm Kirsty Bennett, founder of MITEL, a storytelling program for MIT. I'll be your moderator for the next hour or so as we hear 7 McGovern storytellers share true stories on the theme of resilience. We are thrilled to host this event as part of the McGovern's 20th anniversary celebration, and we are particularly delighted to have the Institute's co-founder, Laurie Hart-McGovern, in our virtual audience. Welcome. I've always been a fan of the McGovern, even from afar, so much so that I brought both of my babies to have their brains scanned there in the name of scientific research. They're still only 1 and 4, but maybe they'll be brain scientists too one day. But in working on tonight's program, it opened up so much more of the McGovern to me, and I know it will for you too. Through the power of these stories, you're about to discover the diversity of discipline at the Institute and really get to know the scientists that call it home. That's right. We are putting scientists right out of their comfort zone and asking them to talk about themselves as well as their work. And to our theme tonight, resilience. I think it's fair to say that everyone watching this event tonight, wherever you are in the world, knows something about resilience. It's been quite a year. So tonight, we're going to celebrate that very human strength. This hour, you will hear stories of failed experiments, of crushing setbacks, of overwhelming doubt. These 7 storytellers have experienced and overcome it all. Tonight, each one will share a true personal story of grit, perseverance, and resilience. We have 2 judges for today's slam. Maddie Safire, host of NPR's daily science podcast, Shortwave. There she is. And Tina Hesman-Say, a senior writer at Science News. Hello, Tina. Maddie and Tina will have the difficult task of selecting a winner for today's slam at the end of the hour. They will judge each 5-minute story on the following criteria. 1, theme. How well does it relate to the theme of resilience? 2, clarity. Is the story and any scientific concepts in the story easy to understand? And originality. Is the story uniquely captivating and is it memorable? The winner will receive a cash reward, this amazing trophy, and a giant McGovern swag bag filled with goodies. And of course, the prestige of being named the winner of the first ever McGovern Institute Story Slam. A few quick housekeeping notes. This event is being recorded. If you like what you hear tonight, please tag us and help us spread the word on social media. And our hashtag is McGovern Stories. Without further ado, let's get started. Now, to introduce our storytellers, I asked them all a question. And I asked them, if you could go back in time to March and stockpile anything, absolutely anything, what would it be? When I asked our first storyteller, Ola Ozernov-Palchik, this question, she answered, post-testing fMRI data for her study and stock in Zoom. Please welcome Ola.
I was 9 when my family made the journey from the former Soviet Union to Israel. We arrived with 4 overflowing suitcases and 1 broken floor lamp. Immigrants often make irrational decisions on which items to bring on their journey. For my family, it was a floor lamp that we carried with us through 2 countries on our journey to the Promised Land. For my husband's family, it was 2 Soviet tennis rackets. When we left Russia, we left behind our family, our home, and our identity, but we had a lot to look forward to. My parents were hopeful to escape the poverty and anti-Semitism of the Soviet Union. My sister and I were excited about all the things that the Western world had to offer, mostly bubblegum. We settled in a small and government-furnished apartment, and I anxiously awaited for the boxes we shipped from Russia to arrive. My books were in these boxes. I was an avid reader as a child, and although we didn't have much, I remember always being very proud of the wall-to-wall shelves of books my family had. The books allowed me to escape my narrow world of long food lines for the magnificent worlds experienced by the heroes in my books. Our boxes arrived 3 months later, mostly intact except for 2 things that didn't make a journey: a folder full of my art and a box of my books. As for my art, I grudgingly accepted my parents' explanation that my art was confiscated by the authorities because it represented valuable cultural artifacts forbidden to leave Russia. One of these days, I'm sure I'll find them in the Hermitage. I was devastated by the loss of my books. We were among the early wave of the mass migration of Soviet Jews to Israel, and when we arrived, there were no Russian language books to be found anywhere, and so I was left bookless. The irony of the Russian immigrants to Israel is that in Russia we were never Russians, we were Jews. It said so in our identity cards. In Israel, however, we were never Israelis, we were Russian. The reality that I will never truly belong in this new country became evident to me within the first few days in my new school when I arrived to school wearing a traditional Russian first day of school dress with bows in my hair, just to find everyone else dressed comfortably in sweatpants. I was desperate to belong, and mastering the language was my entry ticket. At first, I had a slow start. For my first few months we were in Israel, my mom paid me 5 cents per page to motivate me to read children's picture books. I went from reading Around the World in 80 Days in Russian to laboriously decoding Lama Lama Red Pajama in Hebrew, one word at a time. It was painful and demoralizing, and I felt like a bird without wings. I was ready to pack up my belongings and travel back to Russia in pursuit of my lost art. But the week before summer vacation, my class took a trip to a local library to pick out our summer readings, and I came across a book about a boy in a foster family that was a part of an 8-book series. I was immediately sucked in, and by the end of the summer, I finished all the books in the series, and by September 1st, I was so fluent in Hebrew that I was exempt from the language learners program at my school. Reading was my anchor and my outlet through our many moves over the following years. Through my very rough adolescence, books of existential philosophers gave me a grand perspective on my teenage angsts. In a small and isolated kibbutz where I was sent to escape the bad influences of my neighborhood, in a remote military base where I served for 2 years, and in my early days in the US, when I began attending community college, my reading is what helped me survive and even thrive. Reading was everything to me, and so I was struck when I first encountered a child who couldn't read. Given my passion for reading, it's not surprising that during my junior year of college, I began working at the Institute for Reading Research. I evaluated the efficacy of a curriculum developed by the Institute researchers, and through this work, I would regularly visit schools in wealthy suburban, inner city, and immigrant neighborhoods to administer reading assessments to children at regular intervals. I was struck at the variability with which children made progress from month to month. Some kids could read effortlessly, others with a bit more difficulty, and then there were children like Ruben, who had developmental dyslexia. Ruben was a bright and chatty second grader who, in the span of our walk down the hall from his classroom to the testing room, would not only update me on his latest Lego creations, but also on the most intimate details of his family's life, like his Aunt Rachel's divorce. We would enter the testing room and his face would visibly fall. Ruben would sit in front of me every 2 weeks, frustrated, with tears welling up in his eyes, trying his hardest to read through a passage, word by word by word, just like I did so many years ago. But for him, this wasn't a fleeting hiccup, but the beginning of a lifelong struggle. This experience sparked my passion to unravel the neural mechanisms of individual differences in reading development. In our research here at McGovern Institute, we've been discovering that children at risk for developmental dyslexia show brain alterations often associated with this disorder as early as first few months of kindergarten. Despite substantial hereditary and behavioral risk, however, some children proceed to develop typical reading skills, and the research shows that these children often recruit alternative neural pathways and use different cognitive strategies for reading. So I'm interested in figuring out these mechanisms of risk and resilience in reading development because I believe that reading is not only a privilege and an anchor as it was for me, but a basic human right that all children should enjoy. Thank you.
Yay to Ola. Thank you so much for being our first storyteller. I love that story, and I have such a clear image of the determined little girl who loves bubblegum and wants to find a way to read. Thank you for bringing her into the room with you tonight. Our next storyteller is Jill Crittenden. And when I asked Jill what she would stockpile if she could go back in time to March, she answered, stock in Zoom. But she added she is not ready to tell us what she would do with the profits. Please welcome Jill.
Thank you. Perseverance is usually considered a good thing. It takes perseverance to learn skills, like riding a bike. Every time you fall off, you have to get back on again and again. In fact, if you've ever had dinner with a toddler, you know that even a simple behavior like feeding yourself takes perseverance and repetition. After a while, the whole sequence of movements required for whatever task you're doing seems effortless, and we just go on autopilot. But sometimes that autopilot is our own worst enemy and unconsciously initiates harmful habits like nail biting or smoking. In many brain disorders, such as autism and schizophrenia, repetitive behaviors can be severe and very difficult to disrupt. People become so stuck doing the same thing over and over again that they seem completely unaware of the world around them. A few years ago, I was studying the biological basis of these extreme repetitive behaviors in Anne Grabiel's lab, and we made a remarkable discovery about why they might sometimes be so hard to disrupt. That's interesting in and of itself, but the resilience part of my story is about what happened when we tried to publish our discovery. We were doing experiments to test which neurons in the brain disrupt a habit. For example, if someone says, "Stop biting your nails," which neurons hear it and make you stop? We were using genetically engineered mice to study this so that we could actually control the activity of specific brain cells to figure out which ones disrupt the autopilot. To induce the repetitive behaviors, we used amphetamine. You might or might not know that amphetamine causes really extreme repetitive behaviors that are really hard to disrupt, like skin picking or pacing. Our big discovery was that these extreme repetitive behaviors were not interruptible like they should be. The autopilot was deaf and could not be turned off when you were exposed to amphetamine. Our discovery suggested that in other cases of pathological repetitive behaviors, when people are very engaged and seem to not even hear the people who are trying to interrupt them, in fact, the habit part of their brain might not even be getting the signal that somebody's trying to talk to them. When we were writing up this exciting discovery for publication, kaboom, a Canadian group unexpectedly published a paper about the genetically engineered mice we had used. And they said that these mice, when they were trying to solve a task in a maze, kept turning the wrong way over and over again. What did that mean about the discovery we'd made about repetitive behaviors using these very same mice? Our team had an emergency meeting, and we figured out how to edit our manuscript and incorporate the Canadian group's findings into our paper. And then we sent it to a top journal, and we waited. Let me tell you a bit about the manuscript review process. It has multiple steps. The first one is to interest the journal editors enough to send your paper out for review by other scientists. We succeeded with that step. The second hurdle is peer review, when experts in your field critique your manuscript line by line. There are often only 2 reviewers of your manuscript, but a third reviewer might be added as a tiebreaker if the first 2 don't see eye to eye. So reviewer number 3 is the term that's often used to the most harsh critic of your work. Finally, our reviews were back, and we had 3 of them. I carefully read through the requested changes to our manuscript line by line, but when I got to reviewer number 3, my heart sank. Number 3 said that what the Canadian group had said about the genetically engineered mice that we'd used was a deal breaker, and that we had to repeat all of our experiments with a completely different method. This would take many, many months. Moreover, a key member of our team was just about to move away to California. I felt like reviewer number 3 had broken both my kneecaps. But I found out I could still stand back up and go in the lab. While we set up the new experimental methods and looked for a replacement team member, we looked more closely at the behavioral mice we decided to use, and we found that their repetitive behaviors, in fact, went on much longer than in normal mice. And we found that the genetic mutation in them actually might be related to this in the habit part of the brain, how gene expression had changed. So this was interesting because it shows how a genetic mutation can make someone more vulnerable to have these extreme repetitive behaviors. We wrote up the story and we published it without much trouble. Eventually, we were able to get the requested new experiments done as well, and we published our discovery about how amphetamine can make the habit-driving autopilot numb to inputs. So in the end, we got 2 papers out of the rejection by reviewer number 3. So when you read that review, be resilient, persevere. Maybe you can make lemonade out of lemons.
And a huge congratulations to our second storyteller. Thank you so much. This is a story I love because it lets us in on the inside baseball of science and the scientific process. I know that there are going to be many in our audience who understand just how terrifying reviewer number 3 can be. So thank you so much, Jill. Our next storyteller is Kristy Johnson. And when I asked what she would have stockpiled if she could go back in time to March, she gave an answer very, very dear to my heart. She said she would have stockpiled infinite childcare. Please welcome Christy.
You know that moment in movies where the character stares off into space and the camera zooms in through their eyeball and magically flashes up all the memories, all the moments in their life that led up to that one particular moment? That was me on March 8th, 2012. I was in Indiana, sitting on the beige carpet of my parents' living room. My best friend's father had just passed away suddenly, and I'd flown home with my 9-month-old son to be with her. While I was on the plane, my son's neurologist had called. He left a message saying, "You need to come in," which, is never a great thing to hear from a neurologist. The month before, we'd been referred to him because my son, Felix, had missed every single milestone. He wasn't rolling over, he couldn't sit, didn't babble, didn't use his hands for anything, not to grab a toy or touch my face. By the time we saw the neurologist, he immediately called for genetic testing. So while I was at the funeral for my best friend's father, my husband was back in California, where we were living at the time, listening to the doctor tell him that Felix was missing a handful of genes. One gene in particular was critical for development, and he didn't have it. There were 7 known cases worldwide at that time, but specific patterns had already begun to emerge. All of these children had absent speech, meaning no spoken words ever. They had severe intellectual disabilities, epilepsy, autistic traits, motor challenges. At that time, there were no cases of individuals who could walk. They struggled to use their hands and plan movements, and it would be lifelong. And that night, as my husband relayed this information to me over the phone, as I was already exhausted and raw and overwhelmed by the capriciousness of life and death, I felt an extraordinary sensation of clarity. That was the moment when all the pieces of my life fast-forwarded to me sitting on the beige carpeted corner of the living room. Up until that moment, I had thought I was going to be an astrophysicist. Before getting married and having Felix, I'd been on a relatively straight academic path in physics. I'd been a Goldwater scholar, I'd graduated summa cum laude with honors, minors, math, and astronomy, all the usual stuff. I'd gone straight into a PhD program out of undergrad. But none of that mattered anymore. So instead of returning to finish my PhD, I stayed home. In the evenings, I taught college astronomy and edited scientific manuscripts and grants to pay the bills. But when Felix was awake, I was with him. And in every spare second, I was reading about autism, genetics, neuroscience, anything I could get my hands on that might help. I began tinkering with Arduinos, fabricating toys and tools. It was clear that if I wanted a better world for Felix, more knowledge, better tools, deeper understanding, I was going to have to build it myself. Eventually, my husband finished his PhD, we moved to Boston for his postdoc, and Felix started at a special school. For the first time since that night in Indiana, I considered going back to finish my PhD. Except physics wasn't the love of my life anymore. Felix was. Alas, not everyone found that as poetic as I did, and I was routinely rejected from every position that I applied to. Then, while reading an Oprah magazine my mother had left in our bathroom, I learned about the Media Lab, and I knew I had found it, the academic island of misfit toys. Finally, I would fit in. Graduate school has been this winding, wild ride across disciplines, trying to figure out the fundamentals necessary to build a whole field of study around individuals with severe intellectual disabilities, nonverbal or minimally verbal communication, and multiple diagnoses, including autism. I built devices, sensors, algorithms, ran studies. Eventually, I found my way to neuroscience and began working with members of the Gabrieli lab on a project to study the neural basis of affinities, those deep, passionate interests that individuals with autism, and indeed all of us, often have. Felix's world revolves around music. It's the way we connect with him. It's the way he regulates and socializes. The greatest way to make him laugh is a glissando, like Wile E. Coyote falling off a cliff. Grrr, splat. So instead of asking how to minimize this love or how it interferes with his life, we lean in. We ask how these affinities can enhance or strengthen skills. My research is based on what people can do, how they thrive, not the ways in which they're deficient or lacking. Another project studies nonverbal and minimally verbal individuals from vocalizations like ah. These are non-speech, but deeply informative modes of communication. We've built an end-to-end pipeline to capture these vocalizations in the wild, machine learning algorithms to classify them, and we're developing a tool that shares the meaning behind these sounds in real time to enhance the communication between nonverbal individuals and the world. We're trying to change the question from why don't they speak to how do they communicate? Here's the thing. There is a lot that Felix can't do, but there's also so much that he can. In life, we often don't get to choose the path we're on, but we do get to choose what we're going to do on the journey.
Thank you so much, Christy, for that beautiful story. And thank you so much for introducing us all to Felix and for being the sort of person who faces a problem head on and with so much love. Please welcome our next storyteller, Mahdi Ramadan. When I asked him what he would stockpile if he could go back in time to March, he said something that I think we all would love a little bit more of these days, Clorox wipes. Please welcome Merti.
Thank you. My story begins with my mom, sister, and I being evacuated by US Marines from war-torn Lebanon to Cyprus. I remember finding a cotton candy machine on the battleship we were on, and just for a fleeting moment, I could enjoy being a kid. Not a kid terrified of what he's just experienced, not a kid terrified of what lies ahead. After 5 long days, we finally arrived in the Seattle airport, and a strong smell of coffee welcomed us to our new home and our new way of life. Now, this might seem like a triumphant moment, that now we're saved, but it's not always that simple. As we made our way home, I remember a mix of emotion. We were joyful and relieved, but at the same time nervous. Are we going to be okay here? With sudden change comes sudden maturity. And even at a young age of 11 years old, I realized I had opportunities here in the United States I didn't have back in Lebanon. I was absolutely fascinated by the brain and mathematics, and I dreamt that one day I want to go to college and I want to become a neuroscientist, just like my hero, Oliver Sacks. As we settled into life in Seattle, everything seemed bright. But then one day, our foundation came crashing down. My dad had his second heart attack, but this time it was different. This time, he lost his job, medical bills piled up. We actually had to relocate from our home to government housing to afford rent. I felt as if the ground beneath us began to crumble. And I started asking myself, am I going to be okay? Will I still be able to attend college one day? I'm still going to become a neuroscientist, right? As the years passed by, my dream of attending college became more like a figment of my imagination. I started noticing a growing gap between myself and my friends. While they, during their summers, went to summer camps for robotics, coding, science, and sports, I stayed home. While they received new computers and video game consoles for their birthdays, I did not. While they started touring college campuses with their families and getting private tutors to help them with the SATs and personal statements, my family could barely afford a car to get around with. At this time, I was nearing the end of my high school years, and so I had to face my reality and make a decision. Is college still a possibility for me? Or should I pursue something more practical and get a job and support my family financially? And I had discussions with my family about college, and it was full of uncertainty. Questions like, even if I get into college, who's going to pay for it? What are these scholarships, and are they a scam? Why neuroscience? Maybe I could pick something easier. What if this whole college thing, this whole university, this whole academia science thing is just not made for families like us? A pivotal moment came when one of our family friends, Laura, who had known me since I was 2 years old and knew how bad I wanted to go to college, basically forced me to apply for a high school summer research internship at the University of Washington. I was so sure that I wouldn't get into the internship. Why pick me out of all the kids? But to my surprise, I got chosen. The feeling that somebody out there actually saw potential in me, even though at that time I didn't see potential in myself, is what inspired me to actually go to the internship. Now, on the end of the first day of my internship, I thought I had made a huge mistake. The kids around me, they were so smart, so confident. They already knew how to code. It's as if they've trained for this moment their whole life. I just didn't belong there. I should go back. On the second day of the internship, I learned I was placed in a lab that dealt with a left ventricular assist device, which is a system that you implant for heart failure patients. And in that moment, I really thought about my dad and his heart problems. And that intrigued me. What is this device? And how could I ever contribute to this device and to these people? And that's what pushed me to go in the third day. On the third day, I was given my first task, which is to code up a small piece of code to simulate the heat properties of one of the components that have to go inside the patient. And we have to make sure that it doesn't burn the tissue of the patient. I'm terrified. I've never coded before. I've never even opened a program before. Why did they pick me? Why not just another student who should do it? But at that moment, I had to stop and think, what if I don't take this opportunity? What would my life look like? What if I'm forever constrained by the financial circumstances that were handed down to me? But in that moment, I decided to take control. And it took me 2 weeks to create this little piece of code. But in those 2 weeks, I created that piece of code. And little did I know that this little piece of code would create the coil design for the component that, selected out of many in the lab, would end up being used for the first clinical trials the system underwent. And not only that, but it turned out later on that my coil design was as close to optimal as it could be. And this is the first time that I felt the ground solidify, and that the first step I took in this path wasn't muddy, that it didn't sink me and I didn't make a fool of myself, that actually this is a path that I can take and that I want to take. I could go back to my family and say that I have a contribution and impact to make in the world and that I can do it, and that college might just be the thing for me. Inspired, I applied and got into the University of Washington, took part of ever more computational pieces of work and research, anything from seizure predictions to models of visual cortex. And I'm proud to say that here at MIT, I've actually had the privilege of teaching programming and how to code to incoming graduate students in the department. And now, as part of the Jazayeri lab, I studied the computational basis of counterfactual thinking, the same sort of cognitive processes that went on in that pivotal moment when I thought, what if I take this opportunity? But what if I don't? And today I share my story for those of you out there who feel like me. And I want to tell you that you don't have to be constrained by the financial circumstances you were born in. that you can follow the passions of your heart, and the most important thing you have is not money or connections, but the belief people have in you and the belief that you have in yourself. And I'm here to say to you that I believe in you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mahdi, for such a wonderful journey, that from being on a boat with the Marines to the jazz lab at MIT. It was an incredible story. Thank you so much. Our final storyteller for tonight is Heather Kosakowski. And when I asked her what she would stockpile if she could go back in time to March, she said, and I feel like we're all with her too, hugs, because she so misses seeing people. Please welcome Heather.
Have you ever experienced hate? Not the hater's gonna hate kind of hate, but someone's deep loathing directed toward you. When someone hates you that much, their face becomes so distorted with rage, they are unrecognizable. Violence is inevitable. And if you happen to be brave enough or stupid enough to look into that person's eyes, well, there are no words to describe the intensity of hate-filled eyes. In that moment, the object of hatred becomes just that, an object, and ceases to exist. At least, that's how it felt for me. My mom had the ability to need me with one breath and in the next be filled with such rage and utter hate that bruises were inevitable and my life was in peril. How do you survive the hatred of your own mother? Resilience, grit, perseverance. Those words have marked my entire life, and they are not words I am proud of. Behind those words are a lot of pain, a lot of overcoming, a lot of surviving. Sexual, physical, and mental abuse, homeless shelters, welfare, foster care, the Marine Corps, systems and structures that broke me. Failure after failure after failure. And somehow, for some unknown reason, I have still fought, still persevered, still survived. My whole life, I only ever dreamed of two things: going to college and having a family. At the age of 26, I started taking classes at the local community college. A few short months later, I was pregnant. I dropped out. A baby. Messed up little me was going to have a baby. How could someone like me, that has never been loved, ever give love? When she was born, my sweet little baby girl, I was filled with such awe and wonder. In the maternity ward, I would carefully swaddle her, place her in her bassinet, and just stare. Her cute little cheeks, her sweet little nose, her perfect little eyes, wrapped in her knitted purple blanket and matching hat that nurses came and went every few hours. One particularly peppy nurse bounded in, "Oh my gosh, she is so sweet. I bet you are just hugging her and kissing her all of the time." Then she took her vitals and left. Kissing her? I can do that? She was 2 days old, and it had never once occurred to me to kiss my own daughter. Right then and there, I tried it. It felt awkward at first, this learning to love thing, but also right. I started to learn all the mom things, baby baths and bouncing and burping and diapers and swaddles. One day, when she was just about 6 weeks old, she cried and cried and cried, and there was nothing, literally nothing I could do. As she cried, I made all sorts of promises to her. I told her it was okay, mommy was there, she was safe. I told her that I love her, and in that moment, I knew it was true. A few months later, the afternoon sunlight was streaming through the window. With smashed avocado and sweet potato stains all over the counter, I looked down into this sweet baby girl's eyes, into my daughter's eyes, and I realized I want the world for her. I want her to know that she can do anything she wants. Looking at her, I realized that if I want her to truly believe she can accomplish her dreams, I would have to accomplish mine. And so I set out on a journey of self-discovery, of academic inquiry. I came back to the question that has haunted me since childhood. What drives people to hate? A few years later, I found the paper that transformed my thinking. I had already learned that hate happens when we fail to see the humanity in others. But this paper explained the neural mechanisms that enable us to actually see someone else's pain. Then it occurred to me, if I want to understand what happens when things go wrong, when people learn to hate, I have to start at the beginning. Before we learn to hate, I have to start with babies. Have you ever looked into the eyes of a baby? Oh my gosh, if you haven't, you need to try it. There is nothing more heavenly in this world. Babies give and receive love at any moment with any human. Not yet closed off to the realities of this harsh world, human babies have a way of innocently connecting with anyone that's willing and saying, I am here with you, and I see you as you are here with me. It is powerful. So I set out to better understand babies, the place where we all begin. Before we learn to hate, but are capable of immense love, how do babies see the world? My pursuit to understand how infant brains support their minds is a new dream, one I wouldn't have even dared dream that fateful day in my kitchen so many years ago. It has been hard, so hard. I have cried a lot. I have lost a lot. But I have also shown my daughter that not only can she achieve her dreams, she can have dreams beyond her wildest imagination. You all, I am a PhD student at MIT. Do you know how unheard of it is for a foster kid to get a bachelor's degree, let alone a PhD? And yet, here I am, a foster kid PhD candidate at MIT, doing the kind of research that only a handful of people in the world have even attempted. Over the last few years, I have held, comforted, swaddled, and looked into the eyes and brains of over 100 babies. With every ounce of my being, I want to know what is happening in their mind right now. And with each baby that I meet, I stare into their eyes just as deeply as they look into mine and make sure they know, just like my daughter did, that I am there with them, seeing them as they see me.
Heather, thank you so much for such a beautiful story. It reminds me to spend a little bit more time looking into my baby's eyes. And thank you so much for being so generous in sharing it with us tonight. Now, before our judges get started on figuring out a winner, I want to give you a quick recap of everything that we've heard tonight. In moving from Russia to Israel, Ola lost her ability to read, a moment that shaped her work as a researcher. Jill overcame rejection from that dreaded reviewer number 3. Christy told us of a complete career change to develop technology to help her son. Merti overcame incredible odds and self-doubt to pursue a dream of coding. After a promise to her father, Shannon's circuitous career led her to the Boyden Lab, and who knows where next. Deepan's late-night eureka moment in the lab cemented his ability as an independent researcher. And finally, Heather told us how she found a new lease on life after the birth of her daughter. And now our judges, Mahdi and Tina, will be selecting today's winning story. They've already ducked into a magical behind-the-scenes green room for the next 2 minutes. And while they're gone, you'll be able to see some photos submitted by our storytellers that illustrate each of our storytellers' lives and stories. And now, while we can't see you tonight, we have a chat function open and all of our storytellers can see it. So while our judges are deliberating, please let us know if you're having a good time and which stories you loved, and we'll see you back here in 2 minutes. Welcome back to our judges, Mahdi and Tina. That took slightly longer because they had a really unenviable task of having to decide who would be the winner. So thank you so much, and I will hand it over to both of them for their decision.
Okay, so that was ridiculously difficult. I want to say, first of all, thank you to all of our storytellers. It is not easy to tell a story. It is not easy to tell a personal story, and it is not easy to tell a story over Zoom. I will say that for sure. So, we were judging on a lot of different themes. We were judging on themes, originality, and it was a really tough decision because I feel like so many of our storytellers today nailed it. But there was one storyteller in particular that also did a great job delivering the story. There was story structure, and I'll talk a little bit more after this because I don't want to keep it from you guys. But we chose Kristy Johnson as our winner tonight, and as a person who professionally tells science stories, I have to say that Christy did so many beautiful things in which there was an emotional start. There was a touch point for us. I mean, we all see the movies where like life flashes before the eyes, right? And then Christy did a great job of doing something we call signposting, which is kind of leaving us little things along the way that we're going to find. Big climactic moment, beautiful resolution, and the story was really rounded out. And so, I'm going to turn it over to Tina to say a little bit more, but there were some beautiful stories of resilience tonight, and I just want to say thank you again. It was a very difficult choice, but Christy, congratulations.
Yeah, I would like to echo what Mahdi said. Every single one of you told a great story. You all had turns of phrase that I envy so much and would love to have stolen. And Christy, what really sort of touched me most was how you said that you're not looking for the ways these children are defective, but the ways in which they thrive. And I think that that is so important, and that is the definition of resilience. So congratulations.
Thanks.
I also want to say for everybody, one thing that I always tell scientists that come on our show is that your passion, your vulnerability, if you choose to have that, comes through more than any amounts of practice or lack of jargon or whatever. And I will say that it's hard to do that over Zoom, but Christy, I feel as though, your emotion, your enthusiasm, your vulnerability too really pulls people in, and people want to pay attention when you can tell somebody's really passionate about something. And so many people did that today, but Christy, I thought you did a great job of that too. So there's all kinds of practicing and lack of jargon and that you can do, but really being truly driven by something important to you there's no replacement for that. So congratulations, Christy, and to everybody else too.
So congratulations to Christy, the winner of the first ever McGovern Story Slam. This very glamorous trophy is on its way to you, as well as a giant McGovern swag bag. I want to thank our judges, Maddie, Sophia, and Tina Hesman-Say for their time tonight. And I really want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us online. And finally, and most importantly, I want to thank all of our storytellers, Ola, Jill, Christy, Merti, Shannon, Deepon, and Heather, for opening up and sharing so much of themselves with us tonight. If you enjoyed this slam, please visit the McGovern Institute website to learn more about future events and other ways to stay involved. Thank you, and have a great evening.